we have here today is an NRS Dry top whose wrist gaskets have seen better days. We recently replaced the neck gasket in the last video, and if we turn this inside out, we can see that the damage to this wrist gasket is far enough away from the existing seam tape that the existing gasket mount will work for us to mount against. So the first thing we want to do is just go ahead and do a rough cut. We'll take off this gasket. We want to leave as much of the existing gasket as a gluing surface as we can, but we also want to make sure that we cut off any of the damaged parts of the existing gasket and any parts that might be not good for gluing to. So once we have a rough cut, we'll take the existing gasket off. We'll go back in here and we'll clean up this cut, being very careful to remove, we want a nice clean line here. You see that my initial cut was pretty rough. So I'm going to go in here and going to make a nice clean cut, leaving again as much of that gasket as we can for a gluing surface, and coming around here and just also making sure, really what you're after is making sure you get any of these little hangers or anything that looks like it might run vertically down the gasket, some sort of opening there. So we're in good shape. We'll get this last little bit here. And once that's completed, we will look at getting a foam core plug in here to give us a working space. So I've got a 3 3/4 inch foam plug. You could probably go a tiny bit bigger if you wanted to. This is just a piece of mini cell foam with some tape around it. I'm going to go ahead and get this into the wrists area here. So you get to see it gives us a nice flat working surface. And we're going to do the same thing that we did in the last video with the neck gasket, where we'll go and we'll use a rubber band, or excuse me, a silicone band, just to keep everything in place. And in this case, I'm going to use the silicone band also as a mask. So I'll be gluing onto that existing gasket surface there. And what I want to do is get this band stretched around, and I'll speed this up so that you don't have to watch the whole process, but I'll get it, a rubber band or a silicone band on there so that it holds everything in place. And then I'm going to adjust this band just to cover any of the red part of the jacket. So that's the fabric surface of the jacket that we don't want glue to get to. And since these silicone bands, Aquaseal does not stick to them, we can go ahead and line this up perfectly and have a nice, good mask. Next, I'm going to stretch a new wrist gasket over this thing. And it always gets away from me a little bit here, but we'll go ahead and just stretch a new gasket over. And the key here is we're just, again, looking for a flat surface. We're doing a dry fit, so eventually we're going to line this up with that gluing surface. For now, I just want to get it over there, and I will put a second silicone band over the wrist gasket, again, to hold this in place. The main goal is that once we get everything going and the glue applied, we don't want anything to move. So same thing here. I'm going to go and adjust this silicone band to have sort of a nice, even gap between the existing band and this band. And since I have to fold them in half for the wrists here, there's always sort of a little Mobius strip situation going on. But we'll go back through, we'll get this gap nice and even. I'm lining up the new wrist gasket with the edge of the gluing surface. So you can see I'm just slowly sort of working my way around here, trying to get the entire gluing surface in between these two bands and the new wrist gasket lined up perfectly. And once we're done with that, we'll go ahead and fold back the new wrist gasket so that the underside of its gluing surface is showing. This is the part that's actually going to get glued. And we can see that we've got a nice good line up there. We can make any final adjustments we need to make before we get the glue going. But the first step is to prep both of these surfaces. So once we have this in a good position, I'm going to grab some sandpaper here and just go through and do a light sanding on both the gasket surface and the existing gasket surface. And again, we're not trying to rough anything up here too much. We're just sort of adding some texture so that the glue can stick to something and these will have a nice adhesion. And clean it up and do a nice sort of wrap around the existing basket. Again, very light sanding. We're not doing anything rough here. Just looking for a little bit of texture. So once that's complete, we can see that we'll get everything lined up the way we want it. Make sure to take care of any gaps. And we're going to be ready to start applying Aquaseal. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up some Aquaseal here. I've got some Cure Accelerator. I've got my VOC mask. I've got an acid brush. I've got a dropper for applying the Cure Accelerator. This stuff is optional. It just helps the Aquaseal cure a little bit quicker. So You don't have to use it. If you don't use it, you're looking at about 2 hours before Aquaseal becomes tacky. And if you do use it, you're looking at about 15 minutes before it becomes tacky. So either way, doesn't matter. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up 1/4 ounce of Aquaseal here. Keep in mind I'm doing 2 wrist gaskets at the same time. I'm only showing one, but so I'm mixing up a little bit more Aquaseal. And I'm going to use 3 drops of the Cure Accelerator with that to mix it up and get it applied. So the first thing we do is mix the Aquaseal and the Cure Accelerator. Then I'll come in here with a brush and a stir stick, and I will just apply a very thin coat. So, you know, I like to just kind of go around to a bunch of different areas, get the globs off of there, and then we'll go back around and brush it on nice and thin. Aquaseal can be a little deceiving when we're doing this, but the key is less is more with Aquaseal. It will squeeze out and get all over the place, so we want to make sure to have a nice thin layer. One thing I like to do when doing this is I'll grab the stir stick after I've got the glue fully applied, as you can see here, and I will just use the stir stick to sort of pull that layer nice and thin. So I'm pulling off any excess glue that may have accumulated during the brushing, and as you can see, I'll kind of just go around, scrape it all the way around, get it nice and even and thin. And once we've got that all applied, then I'll come back and simply fold over the new gasket onto the glued surface. You can wait a few minutes here to let that glue get tacky. So I'll fold the new gasket over, making sure it lines up nice and perfectly with the existing gasket, which is our gluing surface. And I've got that band there, so it gives me a good reference point. I'll just kind of work it around here and make sure that, you know, everything's lined up. Then I like to take the second band, the one that holds the wrist gasket in place. I like to fold that over the glued area. And this serves the purpose of 2 things. One, it holds it in place, but it also applies pressure onto this surface. So we're squeezing out any air bubbles that might be in there, any imperfections in the glue surface. The foam core on the inside applies pressure, and on the outside, this silicone band applies pressure. So as I'm doing this, I'm making sure to line up anything. You know, the gasket might move around a little bit. You just want to sort of go through and perfect this. This is the last shot before it's dried up and locked into place. So you want to just kind of perfect how this is going. You see if there's a little gap there, I can work it. Again, we have this funny Mobius strip section because I use a larger band that I fold in half when I'm putting this on. But go ahead and get that applied there. Not too big a deal. Make sure all the gaps are nice. We've got a little bit of working time here, so it's okay to shimmy it around a little bit. And once we get that in place, I'm going to really push it in there, make sure everything's exactly where it needs to be. And when we're complete there, I'll grab a roller and I'll just go through and roll out any possible air bubbles that make it through there. So this is just sort of reinforcing what we're doing. Once we get all these out, the silicone band will make sure that no air bubbles form. So once we've done this, we will set this aside for 2 hours if you're using Cure Accelerator, or 12 hours overnight if you're using just plain Aquaseal. So once the Aquaseal has cured completely, we'll come back and remove this band, and we can see we have a nice clean mating of the old gasket and the new gasket. So as we come in here and we remove the silicone band around the red part, we'll see we got left with a nice red line. There's always a little Aquaseal that needs to be cleaned up, but you know, a nice line, a nice interface. We have a good gluing here. But the one thing that we do need to watch out for as I clean this up is we have this interface still where the new gasket meets the existing outer layer of the dry top, the red part. So this little interface is a weak point. So the best way to take care of this is to put a bead of Aquaseal around that. So an overlapping layer of Aquaseal onto the red outer layer of the fabric and the new gasket. So to do that, I'm going to use a masking tape here, and I'm just going to go through and mask off a real small line. This is about 1/8 of an inch of area that we're going to apply glue. So we'll go on the garment side of things and then on the new gasket side of things, and we'll just line this all up and make a pretty, you know, clean line that we're going to apply glue to. And as you can see, this will serve as a mask so the glue doesn't get all over. So once again, I'm going to mix up some Aquaseal. Same ratio again, 1/4 ounce Aquaseal to 3 drops Cure Accelerator. Keeping in mind I'm doing 2 wrists, so that's why I'm using 1/4 ounce. You could use 1/8 of an ounce and 1.5 drops or 1 drops. You don't want to go too heavy on the accelerator. But same deal, I'm going to come back through here and I will just apply, again, a very thin layer of Aquaseal. I'll start out by glopping it around, then I'll brush it into place. And once we get this all sort of brushed into place here, I'll do the same thing I did before with the stir stick. So I will grab a stir stick here and I will flatten this all out so that we're not applying very much glue. Again, Aquaseal can be deceptive. You think it's a thin layer, but when it dries, it's a real thick layer. And all we want to make sure of is that this interface between the new gasket and the garment fabric is nice and taken care of. So I'll scrape away any of the excess. In fact, the height of the tape, which seems minuscule, is just enough. So go ahead and scrape all that off and set it aside for about 15 minutes if you're using Cure Accelerator, or 2 hours if you're not. So we want it to be tacky. And when I set it aside here as I wait, I like to come back in with some of the Cure Accelerator and clean up any Aquaseal that got away from me. So once it's become tacky, you come in here and remove the tape, and you'll see that we have a nice clean glue line that we will then set aside and let cure fully for about 2 hours, again, if you're using Cure Accelerator, or overnight, 12 hours if you're not using Cure Accelerator. So you can see a nice clean glue line there. Came out good. That interface is now waterproof and less likely to cause a run later on. So we're in good shape. We'll go ahead and take off this silicone band and we'll turn these guys inside out so that we can do the same sort of bead of Aquaseal on the inside where the interface is between the gasket and the existing gasket. So first thing to do is kind of turn the garment inside out and we'll get this foam plug into the wrist there. It can be a little challenging to get it through that new gasket, but it's all right. Just stretch it over and work it into place. And as you can see, we've got a little bit of push out. The lights make it worse than it is, but a tiny bit of push out from the existing gasket when we glued it. That's not a big deal. I can take my roughing tool here and just kind of pull off some of these strands. And we want to go ahead and sand up anyway. We'll rough up this surface a little bit. Right now I'm just knocking down some high spots from the overflow of the glue. But again, the lights make this appear a lot worse than it is. So same as before, I'm going to go ahead and use some masking tape, and we will create about a 1/8 inch gap overlapping. So the new gasket and the old gasket. This is just the glue line. And we're going back through to put in a layer of Aquaseal so that we can make sure that it doesn't peel up in the future. So like before, we'll go sand this surface. This one I'm just doing a little bit to, it had some texture to it. So I'm not doing a hard sanding or anything like that. I'm just roughing up the existing Aquaseal, knocking down any high spots, and making it a good gluing surface. So once we have that prepped, we'll put on our mask again. We will mix up some more Aquaseal, which is a 1/4 ounce, and 3 drops of Cure Accelerator. And we'll just mix this up. Again, remember I'm doing 2 gaskets here off camera, so I'm using a little bit more Aquaseal than you probably need for this. And again, the Cure Accelerator is optional, so you don't have to mix this stuff up. You could just go with straight Aquaseal. It will just take longer to become tacky and longer to fully cure. So I'll get my gloves on, and just like before, we'll just get a brush here. We'll glop on some Aquaseal around the edges, and I will just brush it nice and thin. And again, we're not going for a hugely thick layer here. We want to just make sure to get full coverage. And I'll grab the stir stick like I did before. Once I get this all brushed out, I'll grab the stir stick and I'll use that to scrape. As I was mentioning, the height of the tape is just plenty, so we can go ahead and scrape off all the excess here. There's almost always excess. And once it's completely scraped off and perfect, we will just set it aside for about, in my case, 15 minutes because we're using Cure Accelerator, or 2 hours until it's tacky. And again, cleaning up any glue that might have got away from us. So after it's been tacky, we remove the tape as we did before, and then I just let this cure. So 2 hours or overnight, and we have a nice clean line here between the existing gasket and the new gasket. And at this point, this dry top is now repaired. We just have to remove the foam core there, foam plug, and we're ready to go back on the water. So please don't forget to subscribe and or like these videos, and if you want more information, visit us at OregonBoatingFoundation.org.